to Deep Sleep Stories. If these stories have helped you through restless nights, please leave a review. Reviews are what help this podcast grow, reach more listeners, and stay alive. Without them, even something meaningful can slowly disappear. So if this show has brought you comfort, that small act truly helps keep it going. Now, settle in, and let's begin.
Welcome and settle in now, as though you are being tucked gently into the night. You're listening to Deep Sleep Stories, and tonight you'll drift into a dreamy tale about a sleepy village perched on Bloom Hill, where blossoms glow softly after dusk, and the air itself seems to hum with peace. Let your shoulders loosen. Let your jaw unclench. Feel the weight of the day sliding away, as if it were a coat you no longer need. Take a slow breath in through the nose and let it out with a soft sigh. Another easy breath in and out again, unhurried. Imagine the room around you growing quieter with each exhale. The edges of your thoughts blur in a kind way, like the world turning down its lights. You don't have to chase anything. You don't have to solve anything. You can simply rest. Now in your mind, you're standing on a gentle path that curves upward through tall grasses. The ground beneath you is warm from yesterday's sun, and the night breeze is cool and clean. Somewhere nearby, a stream murmurs over smooth stones, its sound steady and comforting, as if the earth is humming you a lullaby. Above, the sky is a deep velvet, scattered with patient stars. They look as though they have nowhere to be, nothing to prove. They simply shine. With every breath, you feel more at ease. With every moment, the path grows softer beneath your feet, and your eyelids feel pleasantly heavy, as if they're learning the shape of sleep. And when you're ready, the scene can shift gently, like a page turning on its own, so you can relax even more and simply listen. On Bloom Hill, where the air carried the faint sweetness of wildflower nectar, there was a village that rarely hurried. It was called Sleepy Village by the travelers who found it, not because it was dull or dim, but because it seemed to breathe at a slower pace than anywhere else. The hill itself was rounded and kind, like a hand turned palm up to hold the town safely. It was covered in blooms that changed with the seasons, and even when the days cooled and the nights grew long, some quiet petals remained, tucked close to their stems, as though refusing to let go of beauty entirely. At dusk, something special happened on Bloom Hill. The blossoms, pale and velvety, began to catch the last light in a way that made them look as if they were glowing from within. Not bright like lanterns, not sharp like fireflies, but softly, like candlelight behind frosted glass. The village rested among those blooms like a secret, nestled into a blanket. Its cottages were small and round-shouldered, built from stone that had been worn smooth by time and rain. Their roofs were shingled with cedar and moss, and in the evenings, the chimneys sent up thin threads of smoke It smelled of pine wood and chamomile. There were no harsh corners in Sleepy Village. Even the fences leaned kindly. Even the doors seemed to open with a sigh instead of a creak. The main lane curved through the center like a ribbon, laid gently on grass. It didn't run straight, because there was no need for it to. It wandered around a little pond where lily pads floated in a calm cluster, and it passed a small market square with wooden stalls that folded down neatly when the day was done. Near the square stood an old bell tower, not tall in a grand way, but steady and familiar. It had watched over the village for longer than anyone could remember, and it wore time like a comfortable shawl. Its stones were speckled with lichen, and its bell did not ring loudly. It chimed with a round, mellow note, the kind of sound that could settle the mind rather than stir it. And on a certain evening when the sky was turning from pale gold to dusky lavender, a traveler came up the path to Bloom Hill. The traveler was not in a rush. They had no urgent destination pressing at their back. Their steps were slow, their breathing steady, and their eyes half-lidded in a way that suggested they were already learning the village's quiet rhythm. Their cloak was soft and worn, smelling faintly of road dust and clean rain. Their boots were scuffed but sturdy. In their pocket, there might have been a folded map or a small token from somewhere far away. But those details didn't matter much here. Bloom Hill had a gentle way of untying the knots of story and leaving only what was simple and calm. As the traveler reached the top of the path, they paused. They could see the village beneath a veil of evening. Windows glowed warm and amber. A lantern hung from a shepherd's hook near the first cottage, and its light puddled on the ground in a lazy circle. Somewhere a kettle began to sing. The sound carried on the air like a friendly whisper. The traveler stood still long enough to feel it. The hush. Not silence exactly, but something softer. A quietness filled with small, soothing sounds. A breeze moved through the blooms and made them sway in waves like the hill was breathing. The petals brushed each other with a faint shiver, and the sound was like silk drifting over silk. The traveler's shoulders lowered. They stepped forward. In Sleepy Village, no one greeted a newcomer with questions that needed answers right away. People here understood that words could be heavy. They also understood that a person arriving at dusk often carried a day's worth of thoughts. So instead of calling out, villagers offered small, wordless kindnesses. A nod, a smile, the gentle lift of a hand, as if to say, "You're safe here." Near the first row of cottages, an elderly woman sat on a low bench beside her door. She was shelling peas into a wooden bowl, her movements slow and practiced. A sleepy cat loafed at her feet, its tail curled neatly around itself. The woman looked up as the traveler passed. Her eyes were bright but calm, like a clear pond reflecting moonlight. "You're welcome to wander," she said softly, as though speaking too loudly might startle the evening. "Bloom Hill likes quiet feet." The traveler smiled in thanks, and the woman returned to her peas without any need for more. The lane carried the traveler toward the village center. On either side, gardens were tucked into little pockets of stone walls. Some held herbs, lavender, mint, rosemary, each scent lifting into the air with the smallest touch of breeze. Others held flowers that seemed to cup the remaining daylight in their petals. In one garden, pale foxgloves stood like patient bells. In another, clusters of small blue blossoms gathered like spilled bits of sky. A small bakery sat near the square. Its window steamed just slightly from warmth inside. The scent drifting out was gentle and sweet. Honey bread, perhaps, or oat cakes brushed with butter. A sign above the door swayed lazily, and on it, painted in curling letters, were words so faded they seemed to have been there forever. Inside, the baker moved like someone performing a peaceful ritual. Flour dusted their apron and forearms. They shaped dough with slow hands, pressing and folding as steady as waves. When the traveler hesitated at the doorway, the baker glanced up and smiled, not surprised in the least. "Evening?" the baker said. Their voice was low and warm. "There's fresh bread cooling. If you'd like a slice, you can have it. No hurry." The travelers stepped in, and the air wrapped around them like a cozy scarf. The heat from the ovens was gentle, not sharp. It loosened the travelers' fingers as though they had been holding something tight without realizing. The baker cut a slice of bread and spread it with a thin layer of pale, fragrant butter. On top, they drizzled a little honey that caught the light like liquid gold. The traveler took the bread and sat on a stool near the window. Outside, the evening deepened. The blossoms on Bloom Hill began their subtle glow. The village lights looked softer now, like fireflies resting in glass jars. The traveler ate slowly. Each bite was warm, sweet, and grounding. It tasted of grain and sunshine, of patient hands and familiar ovens. It tasted like comfort. When the traveler finished, the baker poured a small cup of tea and set it beside them. The tea smelled like chamomile and something faintly floral, as if a bloom had leaned close to steep its scent into the water. "No need to speak," the baker murmured and returned to kneading dough. So the traveler simply sipped. With each warm swallow, the traveler's thoughts drifted farther away, like boats unmooring from a shore. The mind didn't empty completely. It just softened. It loosened. After a while, the traveler stood, leaving behind a quiet thank you. The baker lifted a hand in farewell, floury fingers dusting the air like a blessing. Back outside, the village felt even more dreamlike. Lanterns hung from hooks and window frames, their flames steady and small. The stones of the lane held the day's warmth. The air was cool enough to be refreshing, but not cold enough to sting. The traveler wandered toward the pond. The pond was round and still, rimmed with smooth stones. Lily pads floated in clusters, and among them tiny blossoms, pale as moonlight, rested on the water's surface. When the breeze moved, the pond rippled gently and the reflections of lanterns stretched and swayed like ribbons. On a bench near the pond, a young villager sat with a small harp in their lap. They plucked a few strings, not playing a full melody, but teasing out slow, wandering notes, the way someone might hum to themselves while watching the stars appear. The music did not demand attention. It simply existed, like the pond, like the breeze, like the glow of blossoms. It made the space feel even softer. The traveler paused near the bench, listening for a few heartbeats. The harpists smiled without stopping. Their fingers moved lightly, as if touching the strings was the same as touching water. Beyond the pond, a narrow path led toward the bell tower. The bell tower stood quietly, its stones cool and calm. A vine climbed partway up, its leaves dark against the pale rock. At the base of the tower, a small door was slightly ajar, and warm light spilled out in a narrow strip. Inside, the tower held a circular room with wooden beams overhead. A few cushions sat on the floor, and in the center was a low table holding a bowl of water with floating petals. A caretaker sat there, turning a small hourglass in their hands, not to measure time strictly, but to watch the slow fall of sand the way one might watch snowfall. When the traveler stepped in, the caretaker nodded as if they had been expected. "The bell doesn't ring to wake anyone," the caretaker said softly. "It rings to remind the village to rest." The traveler's gaze drifted to the bell rope, thick and braided, hanging like a quiet promise. "The people here listen," the caretaker continued, "not just to the bell, to the hill, to the wind, to their own tiredness." They tipped their chin toward the bowl of water. "If you'd like, you can place a petal there. A small worry set afloat." The traveler approached the table. They chose a single petal from a small dish beside the bowl. It was pale and silky, shaped like a teardrop, and it carried the faint scent of blooms warmed by sun. The traveler held it between two fingers, and then, with a slow breath out, they let it fall onto the water. The petal landed and floated, turning lazily, drifting among the others. The traveler watched it for a moment as it moved, guided by tiny currents too subtle to see. A small worry could be like that, the traveler realized. It could drift. It could move on without needing to be held. The caretaker turned the hourglass again, and the sand began its gentle fall. "Bloom Hill collects tiredness," the caretaker said. "Not to keep it, just to ease it. People arrive carrying heavy days. The hill helps them set those days down." The traveler felt something unclench in their chest. They thanked the caretaker with a quiet nod and stepped back out into the evening. Outside, the stars had multiplied. The sky was now deep and dark, and the village lights looked like a constellation scattered across the hill. Farther up, beyond the cottages, there was a meadow, Bloom Meadow, where the hill's flowers grew thick and soft. The blossoms there glowed more clearly now, not bright, not harsh, but steady and soothing, as though the meadow had collected starlight and learned how to hold it. The traveler followed a path toward that meadow. As they walked, their footfalls were muffled by grass. The air smelled of petals and earth, of clean night and distant wood smoke. At the edge of the meadow, the traveler stopped. The blossoms swayed gently, their glow pooled in the hollows between stems. It made the meadow look like a quiet sea, each flower a small lantern afloat on dark green waves. In the center of the meadow stood an old tree, wide and patient, its branches spreading like open arms. Tiny lights hovered among its leaves, moths perhaps, or small luminous insects, moving slowly as if even their wings had learned not to rush. Beneath the tree, a stone circle was set into the ground, not for ceremonies that needed chanting or fire, but for sitting, for listening, for letting the mind become still. The traveler stepped into the circle and sat down. The stone was cool beneath them, and the coolness felt pleasant against the warmth still lingering in their body from walking. They rested their hands in their lap. They breathed. Above, the branches framed the stars. A few leaves rustled softly as though the tree was whispering to the night. The traveler watched the luminous moths drift. They moved in slow loops, tracing gentle shapes in the air. Sometimes one would land on a leaf, folding its wings like a tiny fan. Sometimes it would lift again, rising without effort. The traveler's eyelids grew heavier. And then, from somewhere nearby, a new sound joined the meadow's hush, the soft murmur of voices. Not loud, not sharp, just a low, comforting conversation. A few villagers had come to the meadow too, carrying blankets and small lanterns. They settled near the edge of the stone circle, speaking in whispers. Someone poured tea into cups. Someone laughed quietly, the sound warm and brief, like a spark that didn't burn. They weren't gathering for anything urgent. They were simply sharing the evening. A child yawned and leaned against an adult's shoulder. The adult wrapped an arm around the child without thinking, as naturally as a tree wraps bark around its trunk. The traveler watched, feeling a soft sense of belonging. Even without knowing names, no one asked who the traveler was. No one demanded a story. In Sleepy Village, the present moment was enough. A villager with kind eyes noticed the traveler and lifted a hand in greeting. "Rest here if you like," the villager whispered. "Bloom Hill doesn't mind company." The traveler nodded and the villager turned back to their tea. Time drifted. The luminous moths continued their slow dance. The blossoms continued their soft glow. The meadow continued its gentle breathing. At some point, the traveler felt the urge to stand and move again, not from restlessness, but from the quiet curiosity of someone exploring a dream. They rose slowly, as if not to disturb the flowers, and followed a narrow path leading beyond the meadow. The path sloped downward toward a small brook. The brook threaded through the hill like a silver ribbon, catching starlight and carrying it along. It made a sound like hush, hush, hush as it moved over stones. Along the brook, smooth rocks were arranged in little stepping places. The traveler crossed carefully, listening to the water's steady voice. On the other side, a tiny footbridge arched over a narrower stream. The bridge was made of pale wood, worn smooth by years of quiet footsteps. A string of small lanterns hung along its railing, their light reflected in the water below. The traveler leaned on the railing and looked down. In the water, there were reflections, lantern light, starlight, blossom glow. It all mingled together until it was hard to tell what was above and what was below. The traveler watched a leaf drift past, turning slowly as it floated. It bobbed gently, never hurried, never stuck. Something about that leaf felt like a lesson. The traveler breathed in the cool air and breathed out. When they turned from the bridge, they noticed a small building nearby, half hidden among tall grasses and flowering bushes. It looked like a tiny library or a cottage made entirely for quiet. A small sign beside the door was carved with a simple symbol, an open book and a crescent moon. The door was not locked. Inside, the room was dim and warm, lit by a few candles set into wall niches. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books bound in cloth and leather. Some had titles written in looping script. Some had no titles at all, as if they were waiting for the right dream to name them. In the center of the room, a rug lay thick and soft. Several cushions were scattered around, and a low table held a bowl of dried lavender and a stack of folded blankets. A librarian sat in a rocking chair, their feet tucked under them, reading. Their hair was silver and loose around their face, and their eyes lifted gently when the traveler entered. "Welcome," the librarian whispered, as though sound itself should be treated tenderly. "This is the Moonleaf Room. It's for stories that help the mind loosen its grip." The traveler stepped closer, drawn by the scent of lavender and old paper. The librarian closed their book carefully, marking the page with a ribbon. "You may choose any story you like," they said, "or you may simply sit. Sometimes being near stories is enough." The traveler ran their fingers lightly along the spines of books. One book felt warm beneath their touch, as if it had been held recently. Another felt cool, as though it had been waiting a long time for someone to find it. The traveler selected a small book bound in deep green cloth. Its cover was embroidered with tiny flowers that looked like the blossoms outside, and when the traveler opened it, the pages released a faint scent of meadow air. They sat on a cushion and began to read. The words were simple. They described a hill that glowed at night, a village that spoke softly, a traveler who arrived at dusk and found themselves safe. The traveler smiled, realizing the book was telling a story that felt very much like the one the traveler was living. The words did not twist into riddles or tangles. They flowed like the brook. They carried the mind gently, without sharp turns. As the traveler read, their eyelids drooped. The pages blurred slightly, but it didn't matter. The feeling of the story was enough. The shape of it, the softness of it. The librarian rocked slowly, the chair creaking in a low, soothing rhythm. Somewhere outside, the bell tower chimed once, a mellow note that seemed to ripple through the air like a gentle wave. The traveler closed the book and held it for a moment against their chest, as though keeping the warmth of it close. They set it back on the table with care. The librarian smiled. "There's a place for you to sleep if you'd like," they whispered. "The village keeps a room for weary feet." The traveler followed the librarian out into the night. The village looked even quieter now, as though it had stepped deeper into its own dream. Lanterns still glowed, but fewer windows held light. The lane was empty except for a cat strolling unhurriedly, tail lifted like a question mark. They walked past the pond where the lily blossoms had closed slightly, cradling moonlight within. The harpist was gone now, and the bench sat waiting, as patient as ever. They passed the bakery, now dark, the scent of bread lingering faintly in the air like a memory. Finally, they reached a cottage near the edge of the village where Bloom Hill's flowers grew thickest. The cottage was small and round, with a roof softened by moss and a window that glowed faintly from a candle within. The librarian opened the door and stepped aside. Inside the room was simple and warm. A bed sat beneath the window, covered in quilts stitched with flower patterns. A small table held a candle and a cup of water. A bundle of dried herbs hung from a beam, lavender and chamomile, their scent gentle and calming. The traveler stepped in, feeling the room's quiet welcome. The librarian spoke softly. "Sleep comes easily here. The hill does some of the work for you." They placed a small lantern on the table. Its light was faint, as if it understood it should not be too bright. Then the librarian left, pulling the door nearly closed, leaving it just slightly ajar, so the traveler would not feel shut in. The traveler moved slowly, as though each motion was part of a bedtime ritual. They set their cloak on a chair. They loosened their boots. They washed their hands in a small basin, the water cool and soothing. Then they climbed into bed. The quilts were soft and heavy in the comforting way that makes the body feel held. The pillow smelled faintly of clean linen and sun-dried air. The traveler lay on their back and stared at the ceiling beams, dark against the dim glow of the lantern. Outside, the blossoms on Bloom Hill continued their gentle light. It seeped through the window in a pale wash, like moonlight made softer. The traveler listened. They could hear the brook in the distance, its hush steady and quiet. They could hear the breeze moving through flowers, a faint rustle like a lullaby sung in leaves. They could hear very faintly the village itself settling, wood cooling, stone holding warmth, lantern flames steadying into stillness. The traveler's breathing slowed, in and out, in and out. Their thoughts drifted like the leaf in the stream, turning gently, floating onward, without needing to be held. Images came and went. The glowing meadow, the moth's slow dance, the librarian's rocking chair, the warm bread and tea, everything felt soft around the edges. Bloom Hill seemed to hum quietly, not with sound exactly, but with a kind of peaceful presence, like a hand resting lightly on a forehead. The traveler's eyelids grew heavier, heavier, until the act of keeping them open felt unnecessary. The lantern's glow blurred into a warm haze. The room felt farther away, as though the traveler were sinking into the bed, like a stone settling into sand, slow and safe. Outside, a night bird called once, low and distant, and then the world returned to its hush. The traveler's breathing became deeper, slower. The village was dreaming now, and Bloom Hill was dreaming with it. The blossoms kept their soft glow, but even that seemed gentler, as though the light itself was getting sleepy. The traveler's hands relaxed, their shoulders loosened, their jaws softened. The mind, too, began to loosen, letting go like a ribbon slipping from a knot. And as the traveler drifted, it felt as though the hill was carrying them, cradling them in petals and starlight and quiet, as though Sleepy Village was saying, without words, "You can rest now. You are safe. You are held." The night grew deeper. The sounds grew fewer. The breath grew slow and steady, like waves on a calm shore. And somewhere in that soft, dark, the traveler slipped fully into sleep, carried by the gentle glow of Bloom Hill. Good night, dear traveler. Sleep well.